In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to add textures to toon shade materials, just to add a little bit more detail in renders. So all I've done so far is I've gone to the toon menu, assigned fill shader, and I've assigned whichever one seemed appropriate of these default materials. And you can obviously add whichever one you want here and just tune it up to whatever you want it to be. So these are just some different defaults, basically all using the same shader. It's all a ramp shader. At any rate, I want to show you how to modify this just to add some textures into this. So I'll start with the eyes here. Let's grab the pupil there, and then double check in the UVs that you have decent UVs laid out. In this case, these are distorted UVs, but this is a default sphere, so this is going to work actually totally fine for what I'm doing right now. I could reproject these and make better UVs, but this is going to be fine. I don't mind a little distortion in there. So I'll pull down here to the pupil material, and again, this is a circle highlight, so that little highlight right there comes from the specular color right there. You can see it. And then I've dropped this down to a single stop. So all I want to do is add some speckles into the eye. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the checker there to map a ramp texture. And right now what this is going to do is this would make her eyes turn blue. So there you go. And the reason I know that is because when I saw the UVs, the pupil was all at the very top, which meant it was all going to be blue. So obviously I could come in here and change the ramp type, and if I made it a U ramp, then she's going to have all three colors in her eyes, which looks interesting, but that's not what I'm going for. So what I want to do here is just set this back to a V ramp and then knock out two of the colors. So it leaves me with a single stop just like I had before. I'll grab a brown color. That one is good. And then what I want to do is add noise in this HSV color noise down here, and this will just break this up and add some of the speckles into this. So just a little bit of hue noise, a good bit of saturation noise, and then a bit of value noise as well. And then this is really large pattern right now, and I'm only using this very top part right here with my UVs right now. So what I want to do is break this up into a much higher repeated pattern, and I don't want them to repeat at the same intervals. So I'm going to go ahead and set this up to something higher, and then the value I'll set even higher yet. Something like that should be fine. And it looks like my hue noise might actually be a little high, but I'll just do a render and see. So the nice thing about toon shaders too is they just render super fast. So it actually looks pretty good. I like what that is doing. I've already got some breakup in the pattern. It's irregular. Looks a lot more like it has a lot more life to it. And I'm just push that up just a little bit. I would normally not go much higher than where I was, but just to make sure that this comes through in the screencast and you can see those textures. So now you can see how that's broken up. And again, I think there would be a few more tweaks. Maybe I'd push this one up to something a little bit higher. I think I would drop that back down to something more reasonable. So I'll just make this look good to me, and hopefully it'll come through on the screencast, but if not, that's okay. This next one will definitely show up. I'm going to move on to the shirt. So I like how those eyes look. They feel like they have a lot of life to them, and that's obviously a really simple procedural thing to add. I'll just select the shirt, and again, double check your UVs. I have laid out my UVs for stripes on this. So basically I laid this out so stripes are going to go straight across this part, and they'll meet nice and clean on both edges. I just snap aligned those UVs, and then the stripes will go around the sleeve. So my UVs are set up and good to go. I'll start this the same way. So I'll just click on the checker, just have the bright color selected there. And this time I'm going to map a checker. And what I'm interested in here is a couple things. First, I'll go ahead and change this color to something else. Maybe just something like that will work. And now I'm going to pull up my hypershade, and I'm going to do most of this in the hypershade. So I'm going to watch this one, but I'm going to actually work on the place node. So I'll change the place node repeat here. So repeat on U, I want to switch down to 0.5. And that'll just make stripes for me. If I had it 1, you'll still see that step where it alternates, but just make it 0.5, and now I've got stripes. And then I want to just make my repeat on V something really high, like 40 or so. So something like that looks pretty good. And over here you can watch what it's doing. So that should already be having an effect. Go ahead and take a look at what that does to the render. So that looks good. Actually, I'm really happy with that. The only thing is where it's dark, which we actually don't see any of the dark material right now, it was still a flat color. So I'll just show you that really quickly. So if this was just pushed up, it's just the scene is quite bright here. and there are a lot of lights. So I'll just push that up to a really tight one, and now we should see this. So there is the darker material there, or the darker color. So now there are multiple ways to deal with this. I'll just show you a couple of different options. One, select the checker texture and then go Edit, Duplicate with Connections to Network. And essentially what that's going to do is create a duplicate of this. They're exactly the same and they'll share the same place node. So as you can see, they have the same number of repeats. So that's a really good thing. And this is a good way to go if, for instance, you're just trying to basically control the colors really in a unique way. So let's say, for instance, I wanted to make the red turn blue and the white to turn gray or something in the shadows. I don't want to do that, but I could do that. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how to map that. You can either you can click this and add a new one, or you can middle click and drag and drop it in there, and it'll automatically hook that up for you. So here you can see what that's going to look like. I'll go ahead and just run a render so you can see this. This is not the not what I'm looking for in terms of the color, but this will give you the basic idea. So really what I'd want to do here is, let me first go ahead and open this back up. I'm sorry for the lack of real estate here. This is just tight doing screencast. So I'll do something like that. And what I would typically want to do here is just darken this color. So again, this is a good way to do this if you want to have precise control over your colors. Like you can't just do it by darkening them or something like that. In this case, I just want to darken them. So there's actually an easier way. So instead of using this checker, which let's say for instance I wanted to change the shirt color to green and have this one be just a darker green, then I would have to change both colors. Not a big deal, but there's a slightly easier way. So I'm going to go ahead and show you that, and I'll just pull down to Utilities here, and then grab a Multiply Divide node, this guy right here. So with this, I middle click and drag down to here and choose Input 1. And then over here in the Multiply Divide attributes, essentially I'm just going to set up what it's multiplied against, so 0.3 or so. So that'll just darken out whatever these colors are right there. So I'll grab that, and then I want to make sure that I have my stop selected here, and then drop that in there, and that automatically maps. So here you can see what that's going to do in the light and shade. So the cool thing about this is, again, I'll just go and do a render of it with the red. So now you can see the dark and the light, and it just adds a little bit of character, a little more detail to that shirt. And then the easy thing here is I just come back, and if I wanted to turn that into a green shirt, then I have a dark and light green just by changing that single color. So that's why I would go this method if you're just going for a darker and lighter look. So something like that works fine. I actually don't prefer the darker, or the green rather, so I'm going to switch this back over to a dark red or something. And then take a look at another method down here on the pants. Okay, so what I'm going to do for the pants is I'm going to multiply some details down onto this. So basically I've created a black and white map, and I just want to add some black, or sort of whatever color this is, but multiply down black on top of that. And I'm not going to multiply the full black, I just want it to be whatever color this is, but just a darker version of it. So I'm going to show you a few different ways you can set that up. So I really can't do it up here in the color because I would have to add either the color into my PSD, or I would need to add another ramp and then use a layered texture to set that up, which I'll show you in another step. But for right now, I just want to show you this one little trick using incandescence. So by default, incandescence color is black. I'll just show you a straight render of that. So this render will keep, and this is no incandescence. In other words, whatever the color output is not modified by the incandescence. But the cool thing here is you can actually send incandescence into a negative value. So if I set this to negative 0.25 and then render it, it'll actually darken those values out. So it's a negative incandescence. So here now you can see the difference there. So I'm going to use that to my advantage to multiply down the black colors onto this. So what I'm going to do is, instead of using the color and actually just changing the color, I'm going to do this through a texture node itself. So I'm going to go ahead and map a PSD node here. And I've got one preset. And you do need to double check that you have UVs set up as always as a 2D detail. So basically this is the rest of the overalls down here, and I've just mapped the pieces that I care about. So this little piece of the leg right here, and this is the pocket right here. So I don't really care what these do. They're not going to get modified, so I just push them out of the way down here. And right now what that's going to end up doing is that's going to blow it out to white, because it's fully incandescent wherever it's white in the PSD. So basically all I need to do is go to that PSD and pull down here to the color balance section, and now I can change that through the color gain. So I can set my color gain down to maybe like a 0.25, and then take my color offset here and go to a negative 0.25. So what that's done is it looks black here, and it is, but it goes 0.25 into black now, right now. So I'll just show you that real quick. And that, what that will do is actually just burn those details down, as you can see there. So here's what it was. So you can see there's no change except for those are just getting burnt down onto it now. So this is an effective way. It does work, but it's not terribly intuitive, and sometimes it might be a little awkward for people. So I'm going to show you a different way to do this that is a little bit easier to deal with, a little bit more intuitive to adjust later. So I'll just set those back up to where they were supposed to be there, and I'll open up the hypershade and do a map inputs and outputs. It looks like I don't actually have that selected, so looks like it's that guy, inputs and outputs. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to break this connection, so just select the arrow and press delete, and then I'm going to use a remap value, which is part of the utilities. So I'm going to pull down here to remap value, and I'm going to hook this up to remap value. So I'm going to go ahead and choose other in this case. I'm going to use the out alpha. I'm going to drive the input value. So one important thing to remember to check is on the texture node itself, go back down to the color balance and make sure alpha is luminance is turned on. Otherwise it tries to use your actual alpha channel, and what I want it to do is use the black to white, so the luminance value as alpha. So I'll just hook that up, and then middle click and drag here and go to incandescence color and map that. So that looks good. Everything worked the way it was supposed to. So now what I want to do is make some adjustments in this remap value. So first thing I want to do is pull down to input and output ranges. This is the most important thing to change right now. So instead of it doing an output of 0 to 1, I just want to output this down lower. So I'll just set my output minimum down to -1, and that makes black go to -1, and my output max to 0, which means white won't actually modify this, and black will be truly black, and it will just darken it all the way down to black. So I'll show you what that does. So there you can see it actually pushes all the way down to black, which again is not exactly the look I'm going for here. But the cool thing is, instead of having to come in here and play with numbers, I can actually remap that here. So I can say that which was black, I actually want to push up into a much lighter color. So maybe I want to push that up to something like that. And now I can just use this ramp to drive that. So now we'll see that should lighten up significantly. So it definitely came up, but maybe not quite as much as it needs to. I'm going to pull that way on up here. Let's take another quick look here. Okay, so I've pushed it a little bit too far, but you get the idea. Wherever it's supposed to end up, I'm guessing maybe 0.25 was looking good before, so I'll just stick with something like that. Okay, so that's about the level that I'd want those to be pushed down onto that. So that's actually looking pretty good, and it's a much easier interface, like I say, instead of having to go in and find numbers and push them negative where you can't even see the result. Essentially now what I have is, if I want to make it black, I make this go to black, and then it's black. If I want to make it really light, I just push it up to whatever color, and it actually looks like what it's going to end up being. So this is the important part here, just changing that output min and max to reflect what you're trying to do. And then you have just a very intuitive interface for changing that color. So that is certainly not the only way to do this. That's a way to deal with this on the default ramp shader. There are lots of other ways you can do this. I'll just go ahead and show you another method, which is just starting from scratch. So I'll go ahead and back up to Maya here and pull down to, let me see if this is here. So I'll just grab a surface shader. So what I'm going to do is, again, surface shaders are a cool type of shader because what they do is they output whatever you give them. So they basically don't care about the lighting. They just, whatever you hand them, that's what they output. And then I'm going to also create a texture, a ramp. And the only trick to the ramp here is set it up so it doesn't have any interpolation. So it's currently set to linear. I'll set it to none, and here you can see what we get. Okay, so now we have those three colors hooked up like that. Now, right now, that's not really getting us anywhere compared to where we were. So if I hook this up, I'm basically at the same place that I was before. But the nice thing about this is I can drive this with another node, like in the other textures, there's a layered texture. So I can grab the layered texture here, and I can middle click and drag here and do default color 0, and then this one drag it down to the layered and do 1. I actually should have done that the other way, but I'll just reverse that now here. So if you ever do that backwards, just middle click and drag and it'll change the order. And then I'll middle click and drag from the layered texture over to the material and choose default, and that should map it to color. And now I just need to change how this is working here. So basically what I want to do is I want to set this as a blend mode to something like a multiply, and now you can see this detail is going to be over whatever color is underneath that. So that's basically what I'm looking for. I might want to change this in terms of how dark it is. Again, that's really simple, just changing the amount of alpha on this thing. But I'm going to go ahead and leave it like this for now. And what this is going to do is not really much right now. Like, this is all going to map to the UVs, so it's going to look terrible. So I'll just show you what that does. Oh, whoops, of course you do have to connect it to your actual objects. So sorry about that. So there you go. So it just basically goes directly by where the UVs are, which is not really what we want. We want these elements, these textured or decal elements, to use the UVs, but for everything else we want it to be much more procedurally driven. So there are a couple of different ways you can do this, like if you pull again into utilities. The first one is something like a surfaceInfo. So let me just, or samplerInfo, sorry. So grab my samplerInfo here. And what I would want to use out of this is probably something like my facing ratio. So I would middle click and drag from samplerInfo to the ramp. Again, pull down to other. And I want to grab facing ratio, and I want to drive the V coordinate of the ramp. So again, the reason I'm choosing V coordinate is just because by default these things are set to V ramps. So that will now be driven by the facing ratio, which basically means it's going to output 1 when it's facing the camera or directly away, and 0 when it's perpendicular. So that should mean this will turn blue in the front and red on the edges, which is exactly what we're seeing here. So, and of course that's completely adjustable now just by moving these around. So I can set these up to however I want. If I want a lot less blue, I'll just set it like that. And now I should see a significantly more red and green. So you get the idea. Although this is really a good way to do subtle things, like for instance add a black border. You know, if you don't want to use the actual toon outlines, you could do it with something like this. But there are other things that you could drive as well. So let me go ahead and pop the hypershade back open, and I'll show you surfaceLuminance here. So this is another option. So you have a samplerInfo, again, that is driving the facing ratio right there. But I can also grab my surfaceLuminance and middle click and drag that down to the ramp, choose other. Okay, I'm not sure why I had to do that twice, but and basically I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to grab the out value, and I'm going to grab the V coordinate here. So now wherever it's really bright, it will be up in the white area, and wherever it's dark, it will be down in the red area. So nothing goes fully bright on this, but you get the idea. This is a good way to create a luminance driven toon shade. And again, I am multiplying those two pieces together. And right now this is not, those aren't obviously the colors that I really want them to be. Sorry about the lack of real estate here. Things are getting a little bit tight. So I'm going to go ahead and shift this down into a blue, uh, something like this for the jean look, something like that maybe. And then just add another stop up here. And obviously you can add as many stops as you want. Lighten that up. So one interesting rule of thumb just to keep in mind is as you get lighter in value, as you push up towards 1, take down the saturation a little bit. And as you get a little bit darker, add in a little bit more saturation. So as I push this down darker, I'll push it up in saturation. Things just feel a little bit richer that way. It's not something that absolutely has to be, but it's an effective effective thing to keep in mind. Okay, so those colors aren't great, but hopefully this will just demonstrate the idea. Yep, so that's the basic idea. And if you wanted to actually add texture elements that weren't being multiplied over, for example, then it would be as simple as just create those PSDs and include actual alpha information. And then when you come to your layered texture here, essentially you would just use the over mode, and whatever would be alpha here would just knock out. So that way you can have a solid texture that is not multiplied or anything over those colors. It just basically works like a layer on top of another layer in Photoshop. So hopefully that will help you if you're looking to add some textures to toons.